We're glad you're joining us tonight. Thank you for being here, and we're going to have a good time tonight. We're going to be talking about freedom from addiction, part 2. This is last week, or actually it was the week before, we did freedom from addiction, which would have been part 1, and I did that with my wife. We showed a brief video clip kind of my testimony and her testimony and surrounding my addiction and my deliverance and my found relationship with Jesus Christ, which is consistent to this day. And so tonight we're going to be talking with the person who was actually involved in the helping, which was my pastor and the pastor of our church, Pastor David Ford, who will be answering the questions tonight. So we're going to take a little bit of a different turn. We're not going to repeat the same thing we did with Clarissa and going through the same questions or story, but same questions, same answers, but we will be covering the same story. And so I'm going to ask questions around the same circumstances, but now we're going to get the perspective of the person who was basically performing the help. And so I want to highlight that idea. Like what does it really mean to get help? What does help look like? Because there's a lot of options out there when it comes to the issues of addiction. And addiction can be anything. I mentioned it in the last couple of podcasts. It's not down to just drugs. It can be anything you are addicted to that is either out of control or is destroying your life or will destroy your life. And so people are addicted to a lot of things. So let's talk about help. Tell me first, the first question I have is, what is, like, when you look at the Bible, they came to Jesus with, some of them came just open to what Jesus was doing, and then others came to Jesus with like an expectation of what he should do. And so how does the Bible define help from the church? What does help from the church really look like? What is the church supposed to do for people?
Well, I think to start off with, I think the most important part of understanding, it's easy to read, and that's why it's important to read particularly to read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, over and over and over again, is so that you can get into the story enough to where you're actually following what's going on and what's happening. Because there's a way of thinking that this is secular and is spilling into the Christian world as well, is the idea that people have to want help before they can get the help. And that's not true. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't true in your case. You weren't asking for help. You weren't looking for help. No. And so I think that's a very, very critical thing to understand. So you kind of gave two options here. There were some people that came to Jesus that were listening to what he said, and then there were other people that came to Jesus that were expecting him to do certain things as if that's the only people that Jesus ever encountered. And that's not the case, because actually the entire story of Jesus is Jesus going to places and finding people. Yeah. The whole thing.
Yeah.
He went and found the apostles, the disciples. He went and found a woman at the well. Yeah. Nobody came. He didn't just show up somewhere. Yeah. And then all of a sudden people started following him. He went and found all these people. All the miracles, the widow of Nain. Jesus is on his way out and encounters this funeral and walks in and disturbs the funeral. So this idea that people have to want help in order to get help, specifically when it comes to Christianity, is not true. That does not have to be the case. The person that needs help doesn't have to want the help to get help.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you said that. Okay, so let's jump into the story. And I wanted to set that premise on purpose. And you answered that question awesomely, actually. So we're going to walk through the story again, but we're going to take a little bit of a different angle. And Pastor Ford's going to share his mindset, thoughts, responses to what was going on. So let's start right from the very beginning. You got a phone call. I think it was either from my wife or maybe I sent you a text. I can't remember what happened first. But when you found out that I was addicted to drugs, what was like your first thoughts? What went through your mind right away?
I would say that it all started when Clarissa got an alert on her phone that you had used your credit card for gasoline.
No, that's fast forwarded too much. That was after everything came out.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So the situation was financial. That was the first thing that came out.
Well, that moment was the moment that we realized that you were lying and going and getting drugs.
Right. Okay.
And so that was very important. Yes, there were issues before then. There were times I knew you were having a problem. I wouldn't say I knew you were addicted, but I knew you were having a problem because you called me. I can't get control over this. I'm having problems with these drugs and stuff like that. And my response at that time was, you need to stop. It's just intelligence. You're taking a drug, and that drug's having influence over your life. You need to stop. And so then it was like, okay, and there was nothing, and then there was a period of months, and then this thing came up with the gasoline thing. And so I hadn't realized, and I think that's another, there's a lot of lessons that I learned out of this that I hadn't really considered before, is having never actually taken a truly physically addictive drug, I didn't really understand what that meant. The idea of an addictive drug. I was taught in school, they taught us, there was a psychological addiction and there was a physical addiction. But what I thought of as physical addiction was a psychological addiction. The idea of physical addiction is this is something where you depend on it. But if you stop it, then you can go back to normal. Well, there are some drugs that you can take. And these types of drugs, these painkiller drugs, they're insanely physically addictive. They restructure who you are. It's more like nicotine and heroin. These are the kinds of drugs that when you take them, stopping taking them means horrible physical consequences. I mean, you don't just stop taking them and then just kind of, okay, I just got to get through this. And there are some drugs that you actually, if you stop them altogether, will kill you. Mm-hmm. And which I didn't really realize this until I started doing some research on this stuff. Mm-hmm. And that was the reason why the rehab was really helpful, because
you're jumping forward too much. Don't go too far.
Well, yeah. Okay. So, but anyway, so that, so when I knew, once I got to the place to where I realized you had a real problem, and you were addicted, I didn't know exactly what to do at that point. I had no idea. Mm-hmm. My thoughts at that time were, as they are in many times, well, in every time that I get in a situation that I don't know what to do, is my first response is, God, I don't know what to do about this. I'm going to need you to give me wisdom. I'm going to need you to help me, because that's always been my go-to as a Christian, because God is, the Bible says, if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask God. And so that was my first thought, is I'm going to need wisdom on this. And, the other thing was damage control, to keep this from, becoming, snowballing into something bigger. How can we just stop everything? And so that's where the rehab.
When you say everything, what does that involve?
Well, you're addicted to drugs. You're thousands of dollars in debt. We start to realize these things. The children have a dad who's an addict. My daughter, who doesn't really matter that she's my daughter, but is a woman who has a husband who's addicted. And so all of the what is this going to do to them? What is this going to do to their salvation? What is it going to do to their future? What is it going to do a week from now, 2 weeks from now? What needs to be done? And so in this situation, that was what I jumped into immediately, was the issue of damage control, mm-hmm. of trying to stop the process from getting worse. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be different for different situations. But in your situation, that meant talking to some of the guys from the church to have them come and stay with you, mm-hmm. because you were not going to make it on your own. It wasn't going to happen. You needed 24-hour surveillance. That's all there was to it. It wasn't going to happen otherwise. And then tracking you on your phone, all of that, we put that into play almost immediately. And then having my daughter and her kids come and stay at my house, because I didn't want them to see their dad in this kind of a state. So it's like, you just don't, there's no need for them to have to be in the middle of all this. And so that was the issue. It was damage control. Mm-hmm. And so that was sort of my first thoughts, was how do we get this under control, mm-hmm. so we can begin to look at the problem itself. I mean, at this point, we can't even look at the problem. There's too many loose ends. And so that was the first thing, is containing it, getting it under control, getting it within control so that it didn't get any worse.
So in similar situations that you've seen, and we've both known people, even since then, who have gone through similar things, and sadly the stories haven't ended the same. And so there's like differences in circumstances, but what do you think are some wrong responses in situations like that? What are some things what would you say people do often that might be like the wrong way of going about it?
Well, I think that idea that they have to want it is a major mistake. That's a major mistake, because the issue's not, when you're talking about children and spouses, and you can't just take that out to the garbage and just go, oh well, it's all over. They don't want help, no big deal. No, they need help, and so you have to make a determination that you're going to do everything you possibly can. And that was the decision that I made, is that I was going to do whatever I possibly could. And until I exhausted all possible restoration in this, I was in, and I was committed. And I think that's a big mistake that people made. You mentioned this, you were talking about it a couple of weeks ago. You mentioned the idea of me coming over and these kinds of things. I determined that was going to be the case. This wasn't a question. This wasn't me going in and testing the waters to see whether or not I wanted to bother to do any more with this or not. And you mentioned it because you could see that I was committed to helping you through this, and it made a difference in you. And that is an issue, is that you can come in and you can have the right things to say and you can talk to people about stuff, but if you're not committed to them actually making it, they're going to pick up on that, and they're not going to be interested. They're not going to see hope for themselves, because you don't have any hope for them. And so why should they have hope for themselves if nobody else does? And so I was committed to the success of you getting delivered. It wasn't just simply, okay, let me try my best, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And so even when I got on the phone and I talked to people, who had ministries involved with working with drug addicts, and the leaders of those things, I called. There was a couple of different ones that I called them, and the leaders themselves were not confident that drug addiction programs could help anybody. Even Christian based. Is like there was nobody actually believed that this actually worked. The core thinking in many people's minds was, these people have to want this, and if they don't want it, they're not going to get free. And it's a childish approach to think that way. It's very childish, because how many times have we been helped by somebody who has thrown a wrench into our stupidity? And that's what's actually helped us. We weren't out looking for help. Somebody came along and said, "Hey, stupid.
Yeah.
You're being an idiot."
Yeah.
And that's what's made the difference many times in every one of our lives, not just addictions, but every one of our lives. So the issue is, why shouldn't it be the case with addictions? Yeah. And so I think that's a big mistake that people make, is that they believe that they've got to get some kind of feedback from the individual that will help them to recover.
Yeah. It's very interesting you mentioned that, because the truth is, the help that I was getting was very forced. It was like you guys were just doing things. It wasn't so my wife obviously cut off the credit cards and, took over the accounts, and you guys, they left the house and went and stayed with you. And so it was like you're going to, this is going to happen. Things are going to happen.
Yes.
And honestly, that's what you said when you came to my house. Do you remember the conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said that. You literally said, I'm going to do something. One way or another, you can decide to totally reject me and go ruin your life, but I'm going to do something. Yeah. How did you think the conversation went when you left the house?
When I left the house, I had no idea. I had no idea, because I didn't know still by that point. I mean, because that was only a day into it, I think. And I think I had already talked to the guys about staying with you, and they were already doing that and calling me and saying he's trying to get out, he wants to get drugs, and blah blah blah, and this whole drama, and which is another problem that I have personally, is because I really hate drama. There's nothing good ever comes from drama, but all this drama is playing out, and it's just like, I'm going to have to deal with this and try to stop the drama. And so So after I left that conversation, I wasn't. See, there was never a point in my thoughts of there was never, is this going to be hopeful or not? Because that wasn't an option. The option wasn't, is this going to work or not? The issue was, I'm going to do everything I can do to make this work. Now, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But so I wasn't weighing out whether things would work or not. But when I walked away, I didn't have any more confidence from that conversation that conversation helped. You know, I didn't see that conversation as helping. As a matter of fact, I didn't see anything as actually helping. There was never a time where I looked at anything that we did and looked at it and said, this is helping. I was looking for very, 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 very small indicators of some kind of progress, you know. And that was really all I was doing, was just looking, is there anything? Is there any progress, anything at all? And so to try to look at it and try to weigh it out, is this working or not, it's a waste of time, because it's not about that. It's not how it works. And so after that conversation, I still hadn't talked to anybody yet. And so that's when I began to talk to other people. And all the time I'm praying about it as well, trying to get wisdom from God. I just knew I was committed to making this work. And that's all there was to it. And so I needed to, the conversation for me was just to simply find the starting place. I wasn't expecting something good or bad or anything. It was just looking, what's the starting place? And the starting place looked really dark. It looked really, really dark. Not, you know, when I say not hopeless, probably to everybody else, totally hopeless.
Yeah.
But the reason why I say not hopeless is because it was just a starting point. I wasn't looking at it and trying to compare it to something. You know, is Jordan saying he wants this to happen? And because that's not what I was looking for. What I was looking for is, can I get inside of your head? That really was all that I cared about was, and I think that is the thing that needs to happen in anybody who's going to ever help anybody at any time, is you're going to have to learn how to get inside of their head. Because if you don't get inside of their head, you're not going to help them. It's not a question of whether or not they can be helped. It's a question of you're not the one to help them. Because if you can't get inside of their head and begin to think, get a handle on what's going on inside of their head, you know, this is, you know, why the Bible talks about things like being of the same mind, you know, with one another, is that being of the same mind, you have to find out where other people are and learn what that means to be of the same mind. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to helping people, the only way you can help people is you have to be able to get inside of their head and help them.
Okay, so you just had this conversation with me. You'd already had conversations with some of the guys in the church to come over and stay with me. And so you're kind of weighing out two or, you know, working on two responsibilities here. You've got me at my house. At the moment, I'm by myself. And then you've got my wife and kids at your house. What was kind of some of the stuff going through your mind? How were you working with Clarissa, and what were some of the conversations like?
Well, Clarissa, the difference with Clarissa was as the victim, as it were, of this situation. And I obviously had a distinct advantage because of how I raised my kids. I didn't raise them religious. They didn't see a hypocrite for a father. I've always been genuinely saved, and what I am in church is what I am at home, and there's no difference between the two. And so there was this gave me an opportunity to be able to say and speak into her life in a way that would help her, because you getting help wasn't going to help her. That wasn't the issue. People aren't helped by other people being helped. She needed some guidance. And so I could tell her, listen, and she explained that. She mentioned that in the podcast. I told her, I said, we don't have the opportunity to choose the cards that were dealt. We can only play the hand the way it's been given to us. And if that means all you have is just a pair, you play the pair. You know, you don't just fold.
Yeah.
It's not an option. You play it. And I told her, I said, this may not work out. And Jordan may not get free, and he may not want to be free, and he may want to go run back off into the world, and he may want to do all these things. And you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to accept that as a possibility, and you're going to have to find a strength in God to be able to survive that, because that could very well be the case. Mm-hmm. You know, this is not this is not an easy situation. Mm-hmm. And that. So dealing with that, the kids this was very interesting to me, and I've seen it happen over time in other people's lives as well, is that kids are extremely, which is probably the reason why Jesus said we need to become like a little child, is kids are extremely adaptive to circumstances. Mm-hmm. They didn't even complain about not seeing you.
Yeah.
You were gone for several days. And they stopped asking. When they first came over, she said, "Daddy's going to be gone for a little while," and it was like, "Okay, fine." And they didn't ask any questions. They weren't worried about it.
21 days actually.
Yeah.
I think I was away from my kids.
Yeah. They didn't ask any questions. They didn't anything. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, wow, this is really something. You could see that there was a grace on this whole situation because they're not with they love their dad, but they're not asking for their dad.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, you know what? And I believe I know if in fact I actually mentioned to you that if you take off and be stupid, your kids are going to be fine. Mm-hmm. Because God's watching out for them and God's going to take care of them. You can be an idiot and you can do stupid stuff with your life, but your kids are going to be okay. And I think I added in there because obviously I'm their grandfather, and I added it in there, and I'm going to help them.
Yeah, you did say that. Yeah.
And this was not. It wasn't in any way to be mean. It was to simply set the tone for everything that's happening. This is not, because what I was addressing at that point is any sense of self-pity or sympathy that you're garnering for yourself because you're the victim. No, these people are the victim.
Yeah.
And you're the perpetrator. Yeah. And God's going to take care of them because God is a father to the fatherless. And so it was hardball. The way I dealt with it was hardball. But I knew that it was the only way that I was going to be able to have any effect. I couldn't allow you to become emotional. I couldn't allow you to latch on to self-pity and all these kinds of things. And there was just no way I could do that.
Yeah.
And with Clarissa and with the kids, it was the same thing. Not so much with the kids. The kids are I didn't have to do a whole lot with them. They were quite happy to be there. We had a great time during that time. But the main thing was just, Clarissa being able to process. Listen. This is reality, okay? And you have to process it. You're saved. You love God. You have to go to church. You're still going to be a testimony. Even though your husband's making stupid decisions, you have to be able to say, I have a stupid husband, and I'm still serving God. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to do that. You can't break down and lose it yourself because there are people watching your life. There are people that are going to watch you and see what you're doing. And so, that was a very critical factor as well.
So I want to just take a quick pause. I want to go back to something you're saying, but just to give people again the stress that we open this up. It's open forum. You can ask questions, and we ask that you keep it to questions. Comments are okay, but try to keep that to a minimum. But again, as I said in part one of this series, if you have people that you're working with or dealing with, or you're in situations like this yourself, we want to help. That's why we're doing this. And so you can either ask questions here, you can contact us through the email address, you can find us online, you can find more information about us, but we want to help. And so I just want to toss that out there in the middle of this. Don't hesitate to ask for help. And so we'll keep on. You said something though that was, and looking back at this, was totally, and I didn't see it at the time, but looking back was the moment. And it was, you said it perfectly. You said, I was playing hardball. And you said I had to say what needed to be said. And you weren't saying it to be mean, but you were saying it so that I could see the reality, to try and get into my head. And you did. What you said didn't feel mean. I didn't feel victimized. I didn't feel, at the moment, I felt like there was no other answer anyway. So it was like, I'm going the direction I'm going. There's no stopping this train. But when you said that, it split. And I've said this before, it split something. And I saw who I was being, but then I saw this other option. It was like maybe there is help here. And I mentioned a little while ago, but I've seen people since then who have faced exactly the same situation, same thing, same exact thing. And the tendency was either to be overly emotional about it, and basically it's just like, you're an idiot, you're losing everything, and that literally would have just been like, yeah, I know, whatever, And so that would have been I would have just had a whole total attitude about it. Yeah. But what is it that keeps people from doing what you did? Why is it that there's such a, especially when there's like, you know, a spouse is the one helping them? Why is it hard for people to kind of, you know, I don't know, maybe the word is disconnect, but how do you do that?
Well, yeah, it's an emotional thing, and that really is an issue. And I talk often about the issue of that we live in a very emotional generation, and it really does live off of its feelings, and that's why we have the kinds of things going on that we have going on. Why there's so much addiction and divorce and things, because people are just becoming more and more emotional and less rational in life. And so when you start making decisions based on emotions, then you're screwed. And these drugs, this is the scary thing about these drugs, these kinds of drugs, they actually turn off the emotion.
Yeah. And
so you're if you're not somebody who's a rational person already, you're finished, because that's all you have left is your rationale. Yeah. And because your emotions are disconnected now, they're offline, and so you have to make right choices. And so the problem is, and that was the thing that you mentioned, was a good choice feels the same as a bad choice. Yeah, yeah. And see, that's the danger zone right there. That's the danger zone right there, is that these drugs, because of how they function on the mind and how they disconnect your feelings, and that's a lot of what I think the attraction is to people, is that I don't feel bad. Yeah. You know, and they're happy with the idea of not feeling bad, you know, because they've been at this level of, you know, bad feeling, and so feeling nothing is like feeling good.
Yeah.
And but you can't make decisions that way. Mm-hmm. And so, but a rational thinking person can be in an environment like that and say, I know it doesn't feel any better for me to make this good decision, but if I don't make this good decision, I'm going to have to pay the consequences for it. Mm-hmm. And so there's a more practical level of it, and that gets lost with these drug addictions. And so when people handle it on an emotional level, and it becomes either anger or crying or this kind of stuff, and it's that emotional level, the person who's on the drugs is that's not helpful to them, because they need somebody rational to be able to speak to them. They need somebody who can tell them, listen, 1 + 1 = 2. Not, listen, can you not understand all the horrible things that are going to happen, and you're going to make people cry, and you're going to make people feel bad, and you're going to make the world a sorry place. You know, everybody's going to be sad. You know, you're throwing all these emotions on people and trying to guilt people into making decisions. And it's not going to, you're talking to a brick wall. Yeah. They're not going to change, because it's the drugs keep them from that. That's a walled off area that you're never going to penetrate. The only area you have of option is the rational part. Mm-hmm. Look at, this is how things can be. This is what can happen. These are the steps to get from A to B. Yeah. You know, if those things aren't there, and forcing those steps to be made, you know, saying, and you're going to do them. You're going to these are the steps, and you're going to walk them. Yeah. And at the end of it, after you've walked them and you decide you still don't want this, okay, fine, but you're going to walk them, and it's not an option. Yeah. And I think that is singularly the most important element of getting somebody free, is somebody has to take control of their lives. Okay? Not take control of their lives for them, take control of their lives, period. Yeah. They have to take control of it. They are out of control, and they cannot do it anymore. And that was, I realized that, having the 2 guys live with you, that wasn't going to be enough. Yeah. They weren't going to be able to keep you. You were going to be able to run off, and you're going to be able, because you're working a job or whatever, you're going to still go off. You know, you're still going to get we had, tracker on your phone and stuff like that, and your phone's locked down, and, and that kind of stuff. I mean, you can only do so much, but I could tell that this isn't going to work. Yeah. We're not going to be able to. So you've got to go into rehab. And so that was when we made the decision, and we really kind of randomly picked a rehab. There was no recommendation or anything. Yeah. I called a few places, and there just simply wasn't options for rehab around our area that were of any value. They didn't deal with so we have rehabs, but that kind of a drug is this and that and the other thing. And so we found this one that was seemed to be more keen to do it, and then we took you in there. Mm-hmm. And it was like you were forced to go. You didn't have an option. You were forced to go, and they kept you locked down for 7 days.
Yeah. No, it's 10 days.
Or 10 days.
10 days.
You were locked down. Yeah. You could not leave. You were in prison. You were incarcerated. However you want to look at it. That was the deal.
Yeah.
You didn't have an option of getting out of there. And so that has to be. It has to be that vicious, because they have to get the drugs out of them. And if there's ever going to be any progress, it's going to be after the drugs. It's not going to be during the drugs. There has to be a period of time where there's no drugs, so then that way at least your body functioning is back to normal.
Okay. So hold on that, because I want you to explain that a little bit more in detail. You talked about not really knowing, what you now know about drug addiction, period, and that level. And so you sent me to the rehab. At that point, what were you thinking in sending me to the rehab? I remember you told me, in the living room, I will help you.
Yeah.
But if you want to just go off and jack your life up, you can do that. But then I'm going to help your kids, and you're not going to see them, and they're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And so, but then I think it was a couple days later, because like I said, this whole split happened in my mind. I called you, and the guys were actually at my house.
Yeah.
And I remember calling you and saying, I need help.
Yeah.
I desperately need help. I don't know what that means,
Yeah.
but I can't do this. I'm literally, all I'm thinking about is going to get drugs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you said, okay, we want to get you in a rehab. Here's what we're going to do. Just hold on for a couple of days. Uh-huh. We found a place, but we got to work out the logistics. And so you sent me there. What were you thinking in sending me to a rehab? Because the truth is, and I grew up in a Christian family, and in a home that went to this fellowship, a church that preaches the gospel. And honestly, rehab is looked down on, or was growing up, very looked down on for a Christian. Like a rehab, no, just be delivered.
Yeah.
So why a rehab?
Well, because the idea, just be delivered, that works for new converts. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, period, work for church brats, for rebels.
I can see you thinking of a good way to put this.
for religious-minded people, because they've already met Jesus, and they've already rejected what he's going to do in their life.
Yeah.
So it's not the same when you come to Jesus. And so I want to just focus one thing on this, is that you called me and you said I need help, and there would be some that would listen to this and say, well, see, that was it, that was the difference, and that's why he made it, and that's why you can say that, and you can turn off this podcast right now, because what I'm going to say from now on, you're not going to use it anyway. You're not going to help anybody. You'll never help anybody to get off of drugs, because you only want to hear what you want to hear. When Jordan called and said that he needed help, when you said that, the idea was that it was out of fear. You weren't looking for help. It was a fear because you were out of control.
Yeah. And
all drug addicts reach that point early in the process. They don't. It's not like I can do this, and just you're Mr. Cool, and you can take everything, you can do everything. It's how people are working with them. My phone call with you set the stage for you to be able to call later on and say, I need help, because I took away the emotional element.
Yeah.
I gave you some factors of rationale. Yeah. You made a rational decision and you called me. Yeah. And that's the issue, is just simply a rational decision. And so I think that's very important to put that in there. But as far as the rehab goes, my purpose in the rehab was I need time to think. And I'm too busy babysitting.
Yeah.
I'm guys are calling me all the way through the night, different times, and getting up in I'm not sleeping because I'm trying to figure out what's going on. How can we keep you from going and trying to get drugs? And so I'm thinking, I can't do this. He's got to go to rehab. And so that was why that first move was made, was someplace where you could just be locked away. So I knew you couldn't get access to drugs. I mean, that was a priority. You had to get the drugs out of your system. That was a priority. And I needed time to think. And that was the main thing. And that's when I actually started calling people. So it was after we put you in the rehab and you were in there for 10 days. And so the other thing I thought was really, really, really good, and it happened purely by accident, but I figured I'd throw this in because I think it's important, is that at the time you had family members that were enabling you by giving you drugs. Mm-hmm. And so I told that to the director of the rehab. And so they said, okay, well, then he gets no visitation.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's hardcore. It's like solitary confinement now. And I said, yeah. I said, does it have to go that far? He goes, yeah, yeah. He said, absolutely. Nobody's coming in here, and not without my permission. Nobody's coming in here.
Yeah.
He's going to be in here 10 days by himself. And in my mind, I'm thinking, fantastic. But at the same time, I'm thinking this is going to be the worst experience that he's ever going to go through. I love it. He needs to feel the weight of his own stupidity.
Yeah.
And God was involved in this. You know, that's the other thing is that none of this was not without, 100% of the time God was involved in this. Every move that I made, every conversation, everything was thoughts that came out of praying about this situation and asking God, what should I do? Give me wisdom. And every step was made with that in mind. It wasn't made with this idea of I'm just going to try random things. It was, these were the steps. And so when I started calling people and then realized nobody had an answer, including the Christian version of rehabs and things like that. But you're in the rehab, and I didn't know what they were going to do in the rehab, and it really didn't matter. Because I just wanted you locked away and not getting access to drugs, and so to me, that is what a rehab is for. Okay, at a secular level, I know other people are going to say other things, but the issue is the rehab, because of the way rehabs work, they can only dry out addicts. They don't have the ability unless they're going to do like what I did. Because it has to come from somebody who that knows that person and is willing to put in the energy and the effort into doing this, because it's not, it's too difficult, to get free from this stuff by just being run through some kind of a cookie cutter procedure. You need to know the person. You need to know the kinds of things that are going through. So during that week, when we put you in the rehab, that was when I got a chance to think, started calling people, and then I landed on, I was very convinced that I had a strategy from God that would work. I had absolute confidence it would work. And I don't remember along the way, I think it was, you had called me at some point from the rehab on the phone, and you had told me about that a good decision doesn't feel any different than a bad decision. And I said to you, I can help you. I'm going to tell you what to do. I am going to tell you what to do, which is something I never do. I never tell people what to do. But in this case, I really felt God dealing with me that I needed to tell you. I'm going to tell you what to do. If you do what I say, you'll be free. But if you try to skip any of the steps, if you try to do things, if you try to play games with this, you are going to go into a hole much deeper than you're in already. Mm-hmm. And you may never see the light of day ever again. Because I honestly believe that. I believe that with all my heart, that this was do or die, what we were about to engage in. Because these were things that are principles that have helped me in life in general, but they are principles that they're universal. They weren't specific.
Yeah.
And so do you want me to go into that, or do you have some questions?
No, I do actually. But what I want to say though is that that actually was interesting, because you came up with that, and it was during what they called a blackout period. So it was a 10-day, lockdown, but it was a 6-day blackout. So basically there was no phone calls, no technology, no nothing. And they actually made an exception for me to call you, specifically to call you. And so I remember calling you, and I remember telling you, I was like, what am I going to do? And I remember I had gotten a little bit sober, but I had, and that at that point I had an experience with Jesus. And so, but even then I still was just like, okay, what do I do from here? Yeah. What does it mean to be, born again? I remember asking that question. I'll ask you that again later, but what was your thinking in response to that?
In response to
what I was saying on the phone?
Well, that's when I told you about the plan.
So when did you come up with that plan?
Before.
Like at what point? Like the day before, that day?
Well, just probably the day before. Yeah, probably wasn't long. I mean, this isn't a long period of time.
Yeah. So okay, all right. So So you said that, and then you got off the phone. What was kind of what were you thinking? Like, what were some of the steps that you were going to tell me to take when
I did tell you when we were on the phone.
Yeah. What
well, I told you, first of all, transparency. And that whole idea of transparency that has to be step one. If there's ever going to be any deliverance, any freedom, any healing, that's going to have to be step one. See, it's not that Jesus can't deliver drug addicts, because you were delivered ultimately. It's just that deliverance, there were things that you had to do before you could be delivered. And so one of those was the issue of transparency. And so the idea of transparency is the idea of that your life now, you open your life and give access 100%. You have no skeleton closets. You have no secrets. You're not harboring ideas and thoughts that are, you're not saying one thing but thinking another. That had to be. And honestly, for me, that was when I knew that you were going to make it and that you had gotten free, because you had become transparent. There was I don't know if you know this yet, and I thought I would probably just go ahead and say it because it was part of this, is that when we took your phone, and because it's an iPhone, we took your phone and we mirrored your texts. So every text you got, I got.
And I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so, and so when you got a text, I got the text. So I already knew everything that was going on in your life. And then we locked that out so you couldn't make the changes to those things while you were in the rehab. And people will think about that and think, this is horrible that you could do this. But the thing was that I was just, as I look back on it, and I realized this was God all the way, because there's no way that I would have been able to know these things otherwise. But then you got a text that was a pretty crazy text from your sister, and it was the kind of thing that you wouldn't tell people publicly, and it was a fiery dart from the devil. I remember this moment back in our past, and at a time when you're most vulnerable, God's beginning to work in your life. God's beginning to help you. And here comes this demonic text from your sister reminding you of something in your past that you had blocked out, and you had blocked out. And so I asked Clarissa, did Jordan tell you about this text? And he said, yeah. He said he got a text from his sister. And I said, okay. And he said, at first he said that was a total lie. That text was a total lie. And then he stopped and he said, no, it was the truth. It really happened. And you didn't have to do that, because that wasn't part of your drug addiction. That wasn't part of your rehab. That wasn't a part of your drug problem. It was deeper. It was part of your problem, which is why you got into drugs and why these things happen and why you got into this mess in your life was very, very deep. And out of that, because that you brought that out, you didn't have to. I knew about it and I wasn't going to say anything. And then you shared that with Clarissa, and I thought, he's going to make it. Right then and there, I had no doubt you were going to make it, because you were not like that before. Before something like that, you wouldn't have said anything to anybody about it. You would, I'll deal with this on my own. But because of the determination to be transparent, and Clarissa was asking you, so have you got any texts today? That was her regular thing. You get any texts? What's going on with your life? Where are you? That kind of a thing. And you told her. So that was after the rehab, but that was the moment. That was the moment that I knew that you were going to make it, because you had connected with your spirit. You were saved in the true sense of the term. Yeah. True sense of the term is you weren't playing games with God anymore. You weren't pretending to be a Christian. It wasn't this hypocritical, religious-y kind of a thing. You were saved right then and there. It was like God, and because this is a thing, and this has other application as well for anybody who's watching. But when for me personally, salvation really is only valid when people can be convicted without other people having to tell them things. When you can just be convicted in your own spirit, and God obviously was involved in that. and you confessing that. And so you did, and you confess it. You didn't hesitate about it. You didn't say, "Oh, I don't want to talk about it." You didn't, which were the kinds of things where this is my life. I got to work things out on my own. Right? When you had become 100% transparent at that point, and I knew you were going to make it then, because that is the key. Because usually people hide. They hide things. They hide things because they don't think they're important. But in that kind of a state, when you're a mess like that, you have to be 100% transparent. You've got to let somebody deep inside of your soul, if they're ever going to be able to get you out, because you need somebody to carry you out. Yeah. You're not coming out.
Yeah.
You're so far back in your soul, you're lost. You don't even know the way to the exit. Somebody has to come back who's got a rope tied to them called sanity, and they get you, and then they walk you back out.
Yeah.
That's the only way it's going to happen. You're not going to get out otherwise. As a drug addict, you never ever get out. Somebody's got to go in and get you. And that's what I meant about this idea, this thinking that people have to ask for help. If they can ask for help, then they don't need your help. Because they just need a card with a few things on it to do. They're already there. But getting to that point, that's the issue, is you have to get people to that point to where they genuinely want help. Because the truth is, we all need help.
Yeah.
Every one of us needs help. No matter where we are in life, every one of us needs help. And you only progress in life by understanding that. But so that issue of transparency, full access to your life, coupled together with the transparency, were the things that had to happen. Those are the things that had to happen, and those were the things that were. If you mess up on this, if you screw with these things, then you're going to have a problem. And so we needed 100% control of everything in your life, and then also we needed 100% transparency if we were going to help you. And so those two things, you don't ask an addict for those things. You tell an addict that that's what we're going to get from you, whether you like it or not, because we're not going to let you ruin your life.
Yeah.
We're just not going to do it. Because we care too much. If you love these people and they got to figure it out for themselves. Well, I question your love. As a matter of fact, I would call it hate. I wouldn't call it love. I call it hate. I would call it selfishness. I would call it all kinds of things, but I would not call it love.
Yeah.
Because it's not love. Yeah. You don't love somebody and then just let them just carry off into la-la.
Yeah.
So I think that those two things are the most important, is 100% access to every area of their life, which is total, like I said, mirroring of the phone 100%, so that, I don't know how to do that on an Android phone. On iPhone is very, very easy to do. And so, but you find somebody who's technical to help you with that. Because you have to have that. You have to have 100% accountability. That's the only way that you're going to be free. And it's not something that you're going to want to give away as a drug addict. You're not going to want to give that away. So it has to be demanded from you. And so I can hear people saying, well, how do you do that? How do you do it? Well, you're going to have to figure out what that means. You're going to have to figure out how to do that. We did that.
Yeah.
We did that without your permission.
Yeah.
And so that's going to have to be the case. And so. But I think those two things are very, very, very important, because you've got to get people to a place to where they can be free. They can become free. And if you don't, they can't do it on their own. Yeah. And so I think that is very, very critical in all of this.
Okay. So for the last 10 minutes or so, I'm not trying to force this into 8 minutes or 8:15. That's, useful is useful, but what do we talk about when it comes to the issue of being born again? Because that's really what. And when I talk about this, I grew up in church. I've heard about being born again, and that was really the revelation I got in the rehab. It wasn't that Jesus existed. I knew Jesus existed, and I knew heaven and hell were real. I knew that I was a sinner. I got all that, but this issue of being born again was so foreign. Like really being born again, because I grew up in it. There'd never been an experience where I was one way one day, and then in this moment of time, that all changed.
Yeah.
What makes that unique between, people just getting dry and, or just living trans? Because the truth is, the 12 steps, the first one is, confession of a higher power. And then there's the issue of like transparency is one of the steps actually. And so, people can go through these, like you called it, cookie cutter steps. And as a matter of fact, they take that same 12 steps and they apply it to every addiction known to man.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
All the way from drugs, alcohol, sex addiction.
Yeah, it's the Alcoholics
pornography.
Anonymous.
Yeah, it is. And it's their creed. But what makes just following those steps different from genuine deliverance?
Well, the issue of deliverance is coupled with repentance.
Yeah.
Which is what you did. And that's the point, is the transparency was repentance. It was forced on you to be transparent. But then you saw it as a good idea. Mm-hmm. That's repentance. That's what repentance is. It's a change of mind. So many people, when it comes to Christianity, is they see Christianity conceptually as a good idea.
Yeah.
But so they'll be involved in it. But they've not surrendered to Jesus, and they think they've surrendered to Jesus because they don't drink, or they don't smoke anymore, so they stop certain things, they stop certain behaviors. But the funny thing is that as soon as you have a problem, what are the first go-tos for many people? They go get drunk. It could have been 6 months or a year or 5 years or 10 years, but then they hit this moment in their life where they're upset about something, and then they go sin. Mm-hmm. Because they've never had a change of mind. They've never repented of those things. They just simply said, I'm not going to do those things because I don't want to go to hell. And that's not enough. Mm-hmm. That's not deliverance. That's not freedom. That's not dominion. That's, deliverance only comes when you have a change of mind. And so what you're talking about in the rehab basically Christianity 101 is that, except a man is born again, he can't even see the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about the supernatural tomorrow, and that's part of the issue having to do with the supernatural. Born again is a supernatural experience. Mm-hmm. It's not a natural experience. It's not a program. It's not a method, And so probably should be said, we haven't said this yet, but probably should be said, I don't hold out a lot of hope for addicts who don't meet Jesus after. So this process that I'm talking about, if this process doesn't end with them, so like in your case, when I say I knew you were going to make it, not that I knew you weren't going to go back to drugs, but that you were going to live for Jesus. Mm-hmm. Because you were at a point to where it was just you, a secret, and God. And you didn't have to go any further with that. You could have just kept that right there and said, no, we'll just leave this right where it's at. But you didn't, because your conscience of the fact that you needed to be 100% accountable and transparent, you chose to tell your wife. See, that's it. That right there is how salvation works. Because when you're just religious, that's not even a question. It's like, this is a secret. God knows about it. I know about it. God's not going to tell anybody, and neither am I. and that's religion, and that will never equate to deliverance. You'll never be free. You'll always be bound your whole entire life. You may go to church, you may be involved, but you'll always be bound by something, whether it's drugs or whatever. You're always going to be bound by something, because that ability to be able to have a situation that happens that you need to respond a certain way, but nobody's there to make you do that. That it's just in secret. Nobody's there to tell you. Then and you do it. Then that's salvation. Like when Zacchaeus, he says, if I've taken anything from anyone, I will restore fivefold. Jesus didn't tell him that. Jesus didn't know. I mean, obviously Jesus knows everything, but this was not something that Nicodemus understood, that Jesus knew all these things about him, and so he was going to get them right. Mm-hmm. He offered this. It was a conviction of his own spirit, his own soul, and Jesus says, salvation has come to this house. Yeah. Because that's how it works. That's salvation. Salvation's not going to an altar and praying a prayer. Mm-hmm. Salvation, being born again, is when you come to a place in your life where you have secrets and it's just you and God, and then you make the right choice. Mm-hmm. You know, and especially when it comes to things that you wouldn't have done before. Mm-hmm. So I think that's That's very critical to understanding what it means to be born again. Mm-hmm. And so, because we're talking about getting free from addiction and stuff like that, honestly, those of you who are listening, if you're not saved, or if you're dealing with somebody who's not saved, salvation has to become a part of this.
Yeah.
Because the addiction is only the surface problem. That's not the real problem. The real problem is deeper. Like I said with you in that situation, that was the deeper problem was what opened the door to these other problems. Mm-hmm. Because you wouldn't have done that. When you started taking the drugs, you were taking them for pain relief, but then you started taking them for recreation. You would have never done that. Mm-hmm. If you were a strong Christian, that would have never happened. Yeah. Because I got a few pains, not really bad, but I got a few pains. It's funny because I've been telling another guy who just recently been working with, he'd broken his leg, and I told him, I said, I have some experience with these drugs here, and I'm telling you right now, don't take them when you don't need them. And he texted me and he was telling me, you know what, man, I really feel like taking these drugs, but I don't need them. I'm going to do what you said. Yeah. And I could say like Jesus, well, salvation has come to this house. Yeah. Because he was doing this because I was telling him, listen, you've got to understand the spiritual dynamics behind these things. Yeah. Yeah. And so he didn't take them. Mm-hmm. And then he would actually text me, man, I can't take it anymore. The pain's killing me. I've got to take one. I'm like, dude, I didn't say that. Don't take them. I said, just don't take them recreationally. Yeah. And he did. He did what I said, and it was able to help him to keep from going there. Yeah. But because we dealt with it at a spiritual level, we didn't just deal with it at a willpower level. Yeah. We dealt with it at a spiritual level. Yeah. And that's you can't deal with things at a spiritual level without Jesus. Yeah. And that's where these programs fall on their face. Is because your lamp will not suffice as a higher power. Mm. It just doesn't work. You cannot pretend something is a higher power when you know darn good and well it isn't. Mm-hmm. You can't make something your higher power. The Bible calls it idolatry. Yeah. You can't make something your higher power. Jesus has to be the higher power. Yeah. God has to be the higher power, the one who's in control of everything. Yeah. So without that, you don't have anything. Yeah. And so all through this process, that has to be a part of it. Like I said, I prayed, and the truth is nobody held out any hope for this. Nobody did, because they know so many people like this. And I know so many people like this, that have not, so-and-so, blah, 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 this happened, the other thing, and they got into this drugs and stuff like that. They were separated. Oh, it was all horrible and stuff. So what happened? Oh, well, they ended up divorced. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And it's just destruction. And so they're just off now, lost in drugs. Yeah. And it's heartbreaking to me. Yeah. It's really heartbreaking to me, because it's like, this can be fixed. This can be resolved. But it takes outside help in order to do that. Yeah. But it takes spiritual outside help. Somebody who's hearing from God, who God is able to speak to them and give direction and help them through. And I've 30 years almost now of counseling people. I have a good record of a number of people. I've got more wins than losses, but I've got losses. I've got losses because sometimes people don't want to do what they need to do. They just don't want to. And forcing them, it becomes to a point to where the next step would be to cross legal boundaries. It's just like, you can't even go there. I'm not going to kidnap people.
Yeah. I was just going to say handcuff them to
handcuff them to the wall. I'm not, you can't, so there is a point where the drug addict has control, but if you're determined and you can do it and you can communicate firmly, but it's the old story of tough love. Yeah. If you can do that. But if you're an emotional person already, then you get somebody else to help in this, because you're not going to be able to do it. Yeah. You're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because you're talking about the rehab is like one half of this. It's just all secular. It's all physical. Yeah. It's all just patterns and lists and creeds and stuff like that, and meetings after meetings after meetings. If you just stay in meetings for the rest of your life, you'll never do drugs again.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like there, obviously that's not an answer.
Yeah, because it's not real life.
Right. Yeah. But then there's the other side that, again, would have been the same, and we've seen people do the same thing, where they're in a similar situation, and instead of applying both, they say, Jesus, take the wheel. Yeah. And they just leave them to do what they do.
Yeah.
If you had did that with me,
Yeah.
I definitely would have
Yeah,
ended
we
up
know what would
homeless
happen.
and-
Jesus
or-
wouldn't have taken the wheel.
That's right.
And
yeah.
nobody would have been driving.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. No one.
Yeah.
And so the balance of the two is like the whole time when you came into my living room, it wasn't just like, either do everything I say or I'm going to take over, watching your kids for the rest of their life. It was like you actually said the words, I will help you. God will give me the answers to help you. And you specifically told me that there was a spiritual side to this.
Yeah.
Not like, hey, listen, it's A or B. It's A or B, but understand what A is. Understand what B is and how God's involved in this whole thing.
Yeah.
And I remember you specifically say, I'm not letting the devil steal my fruit.
Yeah.
And so this became a spiritual thing to me.
Yeah.
Whereas before I was like, the spiritual's gone.
Yeah.
Totally gone. God's not involved in this anymore. And I will say, and just to second what you said before, that all of this being forced on me, the reason I called you was because it was all forced. And it wasn't until things were forced that I saw an answer.
Yeah.
And so when I called you and said I need help, it was like,
Yeah.
I didn't see this before.
Yeah.
Now I do.
Yeah, you have to make people see the way out.
Exactly.
You have to make them. You can't just expect them to find the way out on their own.
Yeah. And then the balance of it when you went into the rehab, or when I went into the rehab, you're telling me how to read the Bible, how to pray and read the Bible. It's like this debate. You're ushering in this every step you did, even when I got out. You need to be in prayer. Yeah. You need to be in outreach. Yeah. You need to be involved in church. You need to engross yourself in the things of God. Yeah. And so all along the way, it wasn't like you were just telling me these physical things to do. Right. It was all coupled with Christianity and real Christianity.
Yeah, because that's the only way to stay free.
Yeah.
That's the thing is you can have that moment. And this is why I think why drug addicts relapse is because that period of time from when they get off the drugs to the period of time when they go back on the drugs, it doesn't, it's the story of the empty house.
Yeah.
And then the demons come with 7 worse than before because the house is empty. That's why all those other things afterwards. And that's the tragedy is that, I see, this is at all levels, but I see this at all levels, particularly with older believers that have stopped doing those kinds of things that they did in the beginning. They were saved, they were on outreaches, they were witnessing to people, they were praying, they're reading their Bible, they're wanting to know all of this, and trying to be fruitful and helpful and reach other people. But then they let those things decay. And then it was like, I don't really care whether people get saved anymore. I don't really care about going to church anymore. I don't really care about reading the Bible anymore. I don't really care about praying. And so all of a sudden now you've got an empty house. Yeah. And the devil comes and looks in the window and goes, hey, look at that. And then goes and finds some of his demon friends to come in and move back in. And it could be 10 years down the road or 20 or 30 years down the road. Yeah. And that's what happens. It's that empty house. And so if you're going to stay free, from those addictions, I'm not a dry alcoholic. This is one of the things that I think is important as well, is this idea. I'm not a dry alcoholic. I'm not a dry drug addict. That's not the case. I could have a beer and be fine. It wouldn't be like, oh my God, I had one beer. Now I've got to go get a 6-pack. Now I've got to start partying. Now I've got to go back there because I'm full. I'm full. My life is full. My life is not empty. My life is full. So I don't need anything. And this is what happens, especially people that they start freaking out and then they want to go back. They want to go back to the things that hurt them because they don't have anything else. Mm-hmm. And so it's this empty house, and the only thing to fill it with, the only thing that you're familiar with filling it with, is stupid stuff. Yeah. And so you're just going to fill it back up with stupid things. Yeah. You're not going to go find new things to fill it in because you're the one who made your house empty. You're the one who's made these decisions to take all the good stuff out of your house. It's like having this house fully furnished. Everything's wonderful. You're like, praise the Lord. Oh, man, glad I'm saved. I've got this beautiful plush house with all this wonderful furniture. And then you go, you know what? I'm kind of getting tired of this furniture. I think I'm going to take the furniture out of that room. You don't put new furniture in. You just take that furniture out. I'm not really excited about that. And, maybe I might even put some of the old furniture back in because it's more comfortable. And then that's what you all of a sudden you've got this house that's like it was before you got saved, And so I think it's really important to understand that these things are connected to each other. If you want to be free from addictions for the rest of your life, then you're going to have a current relationship with Jesus, a current and refreshed and fulfilled relationship with Jesus. If Christianity is not exciting for you, that's your problem. You don't don't fall into the lie of the devil of blaming other people or your circumstances or where you live as the reason why you're having these problems. The reason why you're having these problems is spiritual. Mm-hmm. It's a spiritual issue. That's what causes drug addiction. It's a spiritual issue first. And so it can only be dealt with at a spiritual level. That's why I have to emphasize that, is why I knew you were going to make it. And the many of these rehabs, they say, it takes about 5 years before you really know whether you're free from it or not, and all that kind of stuff. And I don't buy that. I don't buy that, because I know people who've been addicts for. I know one guy in particular who had told me, he said his dad was a part of AA for 15 years, and he told him, he said, you know what? Sometimes being sober is boring. He wasn't saying this in a good way. Yeah. He was just basically saying, I'd rather be empty than drunk. And it's like, but that's not the only two options in life. Yeah. And so even though 15 years later, he's not happy now that he's sober. Yeah. He just knows that being sober is better than being drunk. That's all he knows. It's just simply, okay, I could wreck my life, or I could just have the miserable life I have right now. And that's not, who knows if he ever stayed like that? I'm talking years ago, so who knows if he ever even stayed? But that whole that idea, if you got to wait, 5 years, it takes before you can. No, it doesn't need to be anything. If you're on a course of growing spiritually in your relationship with Jesus, and you'll know that because you're having influence on people, you're seeing people saved, you're becoming more like Jesus. If that's where your life is headed, then you're not going to have to worry about ever relapsing. You're going to have to worry about going back. You're not going to have to be careful. Oh no, I can't be around this, or I can't be around that, or this or that, or the other thing. You can because you're free. Yeah. He who the Son sets free is truly free.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. All right, I'm done with questions. Okay. We appreciate you joining us tonight, and I know that this can be a help, and so I know it from personal experience. This isn't just us making up some cool thing to say. This is real, and my life is a testament of real help. And God got involved, people got involved, and I am delivered. And there's been times I have taken pain pills for medical reasons, and I'm not addicted to them. I didn't have a struggle with them. This wasn't like some kind of a hardcore thing. There was obviously questions my wife had, and everything was out in the open. Everything was transparent. We finished the course. I didn't need them. That was it. And so it's like he's saying, this isn't like, fake deliverance. It's real. And so it can help. And so we encourage you, if you know somebody that's struggling with an addiction, send the link and contact us. We want to help. And so we will get involved as much as we can, and ask questions. You can find us online. Join us in person for our Wednesday night service tomorrow, and we will be here at 6 o'clock. Actually, we'll be here a bit earlier, but service starts at 7. And so you can come and join us in person here at 1100 Industrial Road, Suite 10 in San Carlos, California, or you can watch us online. But we do encourage you to come in person. More coming.